This is the satellite image they tried to bury. Pull it up right now. As of Tuesday morning, April 15th, 2026, what you are looking at is a structure that did not exist 6 months ago, where there was once nothing but open water and coral reef in the Paracel Islands of the South China Sea. There now sits a fully formed landmass stretching over 1,490 acres, roughly the size of Mischief Reef, China's current largest military outpost in the disputed waters. 22 industrial dredging vessels are working around the clock, pumping millions of tons of sand and crushed coral onto the seabed, building an island out of nothing. You can see the straight northwestern edge, over 11,000 feet long, already shaped for a military-grade runway. For the first time since 2017, Beijing has restarted large-scale artificial island construction in the South China Sea. And this time, they are building bigger, faster, and with more strategic intent than anything we have ever seen before. This is not a routine territorial dispute. This is not a diplomatic squabble over fishing rights. What is happening at Antelope Reef is the most aggressive act of military expansion in the Indo-Pacific since China's original island-building campaign a decade ago. We are talking about a 2,743-meter runway capable of supporting nuclear-capable bombers. We are talking about underground storage facilities, anti-ship missile batteries, electronic warfare installations, and a harbor large enough to anchor an entire maritime militia fleet. We are talking about the construction of a forward military base 281 kilometers from China's Sanya Naval Hub on Hainan Island, positioned to project power across every shipping lane that carries 1/3 of the world's maritime commerce, an estimated $5.3 trillion in annual trade. And here is what makes this a five-alarm crisis. It is happening while America is looking the other way. In this report, we are going to break down exactly what China is building at Antelope Reef and why military analysts are calling it a game changer for the entire Indo-Pacific balance of power. We are going to show you how the United States created a carrier gap in the Pacific that Beijing is exploiting in real time. We are going to explain why this single reef could determine whether China can successfully blockade Taiwan. And we are going to reveal the hidden connection between the Iran war, the collapse of American naval presence in the Western Pacific, and the window of opportunity that Beijing saw opening and decided to drive a fleet of dredgers straight through. If you are not subscribed to this channel, now is the time. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, because what you are about to hear is the full picture that nobody in Washington wants to talk about. Buckle up. To understand why Antelope Reef matters so profoundly, you have to understand where it sits and what it enables. The reef lies in the western Paracel Islands, approximately 400 kilometers east of Vietnam's coast and 162 nautical miles from Sanya Port in China's Hainan province. According to the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, AMTI, a research group at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington, China already operates military outposts on 20 islands in the Paracels, including the heavily fortified Woody Island, which hosts an air and naval base along with the administrative headquarters of Sancha City. Beijing seized the entire Paracel chain from Vietnam in 1974 and has controlled it ever since, gradually transforming sandbars and coral formations into military installations. But Antelope Reef was always the runt of the litter, what AMTI previously described as little more than a sandbar with one or two buildings. That changed in October 2025. Here is where the technical picture becomes terrifying. According to satellite imagery analyzed by the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative and reported by the Wall Street Journal in April 2026, the reclaimed land at Antelope Reef has reached approximately 6.11 square kilometers. To put that in perspective, Woody Island, China's current administrative hub in the Paracels, covers about 3.44 square kilometers. Mischief Reef in the Spratlys, previously the largest artificial island in the entire South China Sea, spans 616 square kilometers. Antelope Reef is now virtually identical in size to Mischief Reef and is on pace to surpass it. Sources at the Open Source Center, a UK-based intelligence research group, confirmed in February 2026 that reclamation activity had extended across the reef's full length and was evolving into a multi-purpose military outpost. The construction includes over 50 small gray roof structures, a helipad, foundations for a larger building measuring 100 by 60 yards, and multiple jetties with roll-on, roll-off berths designed for heavy equipment landing. Harrison Pretat, deputy director at AMTI, told the Wall Street Journal that this is the first time in a long time that Beijing has reopened this basket of being able to build islands extremely large and extremely quickly. That assessment should alarm everyone who has been paying attention. But here is the catch. The runway is the centerpiece, and it changes everything. AMTI analysts have confirmed that the northwestern edge of the new landmass has been fashioned with a noticeably straight outer edge stretching over 11,000 feet, perfect for an airstrip. This could accommodate a 9,000-foot runway of the same type China already operates at Woody Island, Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef. A runway of that length, 2,743 meters, is not for civilian aircraft. It is designed to support China's most advanced military platforms, including the J-20 stealth fighter, the H-6K strategic bomber, and, according to some analysts, nuclear-capable aircraft. Add to that the anticipated installation of diesel power plants, coastal defense emplacements, surface-to-air and anti-ship missile facilities, signals intelligence arrays, and electronic warfare systems. What you are looking at is not an island. It is an unsinkable aircraft carrier being assembled in plain sight. Now let us talk about why the timing is not a coincidence, because this is the variable that should keep every Pentagon strategist awake at night. According to the U.S. Naval Institute Fleet Tracker, as of March 30th, 2026, the United States has redeployed the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group from the South China Sea to the Middle East to support operations related to the ongoing U.S.-Israel-Iran conflict. The USS George Washington Carrier Strike Group, previously the only forward-deployed American carrier in the Pacific, has also been ordered from its home port in Yokosuka, Japan, toward the Middle East. The 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit, built around the USS Tripoli, is already in the Middle East theater. The 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit, centered on the USS Boxer, is en route from San Diego to the same destination. Do the math. America has created a carrier gap in the Pacific Ocean. It gets worse. According to the South China Sea Strategic Situation Probing Initiative, a Beijing-based think tank that monitors military activity in the region, U.S. reconnaissance flights over the South China Sea dropped by 30% in February 2026. There were only 72 American reconnaissance flights that month, down sharply from 102 flights recorded between December 2025 and January 2026. While the exact cause has not been officially confirmed, analysts at Asia Times reported in April 2026 that the decline coincides directly with the redirection of U.S. military assets to the Middle East and diplomatic efforts to manage a planned meeting between President Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping. Reduced American air surveillance combined with reduced American naval presence equals reduced American deterrence. Beijing did not miss that signal. They read it, processed it, and accelerated construction at Antelope Reef accordingly. Here is what nobody is talking about. The strategic implications of Antelope Reef extend far beyond the Paracel Islands. Military analysts increasingly view the South China Sea as the southern shield of any Taiwan operation. If conflict erupted across the Taiwan Strait, the Paracel network could serve multiple wartime functions: intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance platforms, anti-access and area denial weapon systems, forward staging areas for maritime militia and Coast Guard operations designed to block or delay American and allied forces approaching from the south. A July 2025 article published by the People's Liberation Army stated openly that China's South China Sea outposts provide all-weather, all-round situational awareness that can effectively monitor every move of military forces within the area. That is not analysis. That is not speculation. That is China's own military telling you what these islands are for. And the numbers back it up. China has built the world's largest navy by hull count, with more than 370 ships and submarines in service, including 3 aircraft carriers. According to Newsweek, Beijing's naval deployments are extending in frequency, duration, and distance. The commissioning of the CNS Fujian, China's most advanced carrier, and the apparent construction of a fourth aircraft carrier, potentially nuclear-powered, at the Dalian shipyard signal a maritime buildup that the Pentagon has warned is designed to displace the United States as the dominant naval power in the Western Pacific. The 2026 National Defense Strategy acknowledges this threat explicitly, stating that a hostile power controlling the South China Sea could impose a toll system over one of the world's most vital commerce lanes or close and reopen it at will. That is not a hypothetical anymore. That is what is being constructed reef by reef, dredger by dredger right now. But the military dimension is only one layer. Let us talk about the economic earthquake that is building beneath the surface. The South China Sea handles approximately 1/3 of all global maritime trade. Every year, roughly $5.3 trillion worth of goods passes through these waters. That includes critical energy shipments, liquefied natural gas bound for Japan and South Korea, manufactured goods heading to Europe and the Americas, and raw materials flowing to China itself. An estimated 190 trillion cubic feet of natural gas and 11 billion barrels of oil sit beneath the South China Sea floor. A fortified Chinese military presence at Antelope Reef, combined with existing bases at Woody Island, Mischief Reef, Subi Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef, gives Beijing the infrastructure to monitor, influence, or potentially restrict sea traffic during any future crisis. Marine insurance premiums, tanker route decisions, regional investment strategies, all of these are priced on the risk level in the South China Sea. Every new missile battery, every new radar array, every new runway rewrites that risk equation. If you have a 401k with exposure to Asian markets, if your pension fund holds international shipping stocks, if you buy anything manufactured overseas, this directly affects you. Here is the worst case scenario, and we need to walk through it carefully because it is no longer theoretical. Imagine it is 2027. China moves against Taiwan, whether through a full blockade, a quarantine operation, or a direct military confrontation. The Paracel network, now anchored by the massive Antelope Reef base, activates its anti-access and area denial systems. Surface-to-air missiles cover the airspace. Anti-ship cruise missiles threaten any naval force attempting to transit from the south. Electronic warfare installations jam communications and radar across hundreds of miles. Maritime militia vessels, over 1,000 fishing boats operating under the command of the People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia, fan out across the sea lanes, creating floating barriers that overwhelm commercial shipping, block ports, disrupt naval traffic, and act as decoys that force adversaries to track thousands of additional contacts. In January 2026, some 1,400 Chinese fishing boats formed a 200-mile-long barrier across open water for more than 30 hours. That was not a fishing exercise. That was a rehearsal, a dress rehearsal for the blockade of Taiwan. Now add this dimension. A May 2025 Congressional Research Service report acknowledged that the People's Armed Forces Maritime Militia is the leading component of China's maritime forces for asserting its claims, particularly in the South China Sea. The report stated that in wartime, the militia would support combat operations by conducting reconnaissance, creating obstacles, and providing logistical support to other PLA forces. Sources inside the Pentagon have privately expressed concern that the combination of Antelope Reef's military capabilities, the expanded Paracel network, and the coordinated militia operations creates a layered defense system that would be extraordinarily difficult and costly to neutralize. Gregory Poling of the Center for Strategic and International Studies estimated it could take up to 300 missiles to destroy China's major Spratlys outposts alone, 100 missiles for Woody Island, and dozens more for smaller positions. That kind of expenditure would stretch limited U.S. missile stocks away from more critical theaters near Japan and Taiwan. The islands are not meant to survive a full-scale war. They are meant to make the cost of starting one prohibitively high. That is the genius and the danger of this strategy. Beijing is not building fortresses. Beijing is building deterrence out of sand and concrete. And this is where the geopolitical picture fractures into multiple simultaneous crises. The United States is fighting a war in the Middle East that has consumed 2 carrier strike groups, 2 Marine Expeditionary Units, and significant intelligence and surveillance assets. It is managing ongoing operations in the Caribbean and South America under Operation Southern Seas. The Navy's Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Daryl Caudle, stated publicly on March 31st, 2026, that commanders in all theaters want carriers as the paramount response to outside threats, but the Navy simply does not have enough to go around. He explicitly said he wants to reserve carriers for power projection and deterrence in the theaters that really need that kind of capability. The question nobody in Washington is willing to answer publicly is this: what happens if a South China Sea crisis erupts while America's carriers are in the Persian Gulf? Let us talk about what the allies are seeing, because the view from Manila, Hanoi, Tokyo, and Canberra is not reassuring. The Philippines, which holds a mutual defense treaty with the United States, continues to face aggressive Chinese naval maneuvers around the disputed Spratly Islands and Scarborough Shoal. The Armed Forces of the Philippines conducted its 11th maritime cooperative activity with the U.S. Navy in January 2026, but the exercise took place against a backdrop of declining American naval presence in the region. Vietnam has responded to China's island building by dramatically accelerating its own reclamation work across all 21 of its controlled features in the Spratly Islands. According to a March 2026 Chatham House report, Vietnam has dredged approximately 13.4 square kilometers of coral reef since 2022. When your neighbors start building their own islands in a panic, that tells you everything about the threat perception. Japan's Prime Minister Sanai Takaichi has publicly stated that a Chinese attack on Taiwan could constitute an existential threat for Japan, prompting Beijing to test her resolve through increased naval and air activity around Japanese waters. The United States is deploying 36 F-15EX Eagle II fighter jets to Kadena Air Base on Okinawa beginning in spring 2026, replacing legacy F-15s. Over 500 military exercises with the Philippines are planned for 2026. The Marines are restructuring under Force Design 2030 to create lighter amphibious forces capable of operating from small islands along the first island chain. But here is the uncomfortable truth that the data reveals. None of these measures address the immediate window of vulnerability that China is exploiting right now. You do not counter a massive island building campaign with future fighter deployments. You counter it with present naval dominance, and that dominance is currently parked in the Persian Gulf. Now we need to zoom out and see the historical pattern, because this has happened before and the consequences lasted decades. In 2013 through 2015, China created 7 artificial islands in the Spratly Archipelago in what was then an unprecedented campaign of maritime territorial expansion. The international community protested. The Philippines filed a case with the Permanent Court of Arbitration. In 2016, the tribunal ruled decisively that China's claims based on the so-called 9-dash line had no legal basis under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. It also ruled that China's island building had caused severe environmental damage to protected marine ecosystems. Beijing's response to that legally binding ruling was exactly 2 words: reject entirely. The islands stayed, the military bases expanded, the missiles were installed, and nothing happened. No enforcement, no consequences, no rollback. That precedent is now being replicated at Antelope Reef, only faster and larger. This is exactly the scenario that strategic thinkers from Thucydides to George Kennan warned about. When a rising power perceives that the established power is overextended, distracted, and unable to enforce the rules of the system it built, the rising power acts. China watched the United States commit 2 carrier strike groups to the Iran war. China watched American reconnaissance flights decline by 30%. China watched the USS Nimitz, the oldest operational carrier in the fleet, return home for decommissioning. And then China sent 22 dredgers to Antelope Reef and began building the largest artificial island the South China Sea has ever seen. This is not recklessness. This is cold, methodical calculation. It is the Thucydides trap playing out in real time on satellite imagery. The constitutional and institutional implications deserve attention here as well. The 2026 National Defense Strategy states that the United States will build a military capable of denying aggression anywhere in the first island chain. Those are the president's own words, codified in national security doctrine. But the reality on the water tells a different story. When your strategy says first island chain, but your carriers are in the Fifth Fleet area of operations, you have a credibility gap that allies notice, adversaries exploit, and historians remember. This is the kind of disconnect that erodes alliance structures, emboldens authoritarian expansion, and creates the conditions for miscalculation that has started wars throughout modern history. From the Suez Crisis of 1956 to the fall of Saigon in 1975, American credibility has always been measured not by what it promises, but by what it deploys. And there is one more dimension that deserves attention. The environmental destruction at Antelope Reef represents a catastrophe that will outlast any geopolitical crisis. The 2016 International Tribunal ruled that China's island building constituted a violation of international environmental law, specifically the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea's requirements to protect and preserve the marine environment. What was once a thriving coral ecosystem supporting marine biodiversity has been crushed under millions of tons of pumped sand and concrete. Vietnam's foreign ministry issued a formal protest in March 2026, more than 5 months after dredging began, calling any construction within the Paracel Islands without Hanoi's permission illegal. The European Union, which lectures the world about environmental sustainability and the rules-based international order, has been largely silent. That silence is being noticed in every capital from Manila to Tokyo, and it is eroding whatever remains of the credibility of international environmental law. So what happens next? Watch for 3 things. First, watch for the runway. When satellite imagery confirms that a completed 2,743-meter airstrip is operational at Antelope Reef, that is the moment the military balance in the northern South China Sea shifts permanently. Second, watch the missile deployments. Surface-to-air and anti-ship missile installations will follow the runway. When those appear, Antelope Reef transforms from a construction site into a fortress. Third, watch the carrier movements. If the United States cannot return at least 2 carrier strike groups to the Indo-Pacific before Antelope Reef becomes fully operational, the window for any meaningful response will have closed, and it will not reopen easily. The behavior prediction is straightforward and alarming. Beijing will continue construction at maximum speed. Sources familiar with the project timeline suggest the base could be substantially complete by late 2026. China will frame the construction as defensive civilian infrastructure designed to improve living and working conditions while simultaneously installing offensive military systems. A spokesperson for China's foreign ministry has already stated that the project aims to develop the local economy. It will dare the international community to do something about it, knowing full well that the precedent from 2015 is on its side. The response from Washington will be strongly worded statements, additional freedom of navigation operations by destroyers, and classified briefings to congressional committees, none of which will move a single grain of sand off that reef. For the 370 million people who live in countries bordering the South China Sea, this is not an abstract strategic competition. This is about whether a single nation can claim sovereignty over international waters, destroy protected ecosystems, militarize artificial islands in violation of international law, and face no consequences whatsoever. It is about whether the rules-based order that has governed maritime commerce for decades still functions, or whether we have entered an era where the nation that builds the biggest island wins. It is about whether American commitments to allies in the Pacific are words backed by steel or words backed by nothing. The dredgers are running, 22 of them around the clock, pumping sand onto a reef that 6 months ago was barely above water. The runway edge is taking shape. The structures are multiplying on satellite feeds that anyone with an internet connection can access. The carriers are in the Persian Gulf. The reconnaissance flights are down. And in a little-known corner of the Paracel Islands, the largest artificial island in the South China Sea is being built in plain sight while the world watches the Middle East burn. History will record what was built at Antelope Reef in 2026, and history will ask why nobody stopped it. Subscribe to this channel, turn on your notifications, stay with us, because this story is not slowing down. The next chapter is being dredged into existence as we speak.